All right, we're live, people. This is going to be a first. I haven't been able to see my father or my parents in the last couple of weeks, even though they live like a mile up the street. So we're going to do a live stream. Now, it's very funny. My dad, I think I've told you this. I mean, everybody must know. My dad's a lawyer. My sister's a lawyer. Two of my three brothers are lawyers. Two of their spouses are lawyers. And my dad's been a lawyer for, I think 45 years now. And he'll give the introduction, but this is just going to be a totally different type of stream where I've made people ask him questions. I'm going to ask him questions. We're just going to talk about the practice of law, fun cases, what he's learned, and we're going to find out, if I ask him the question or not. Let's see what we got here. Now, incidentally, so I'll give everybody some, a chance to come in to get the notifications. The first thing, why is Blue 923 taken? The first thing you better do is ask who his favorite child is. There will be a joke about it there. Uncivil Law is in the house. Uncivil, how you doing? Let's see who we got here. I got Michael Angelotti. Hello, all. I look forward to this family stream. Yeah, this is going to be a fraction of the family stream, but we did a live stream with the entire family, so all 5 kids with the grandkids, my parents, last Sunday, because we all haven't, trying to keep in touch and trying to keep everybody's spirits up. So it'll be fun. Tina Burgess says hi. Obelix CMM, hello. Hey Viva, great work lately. Thank you very much. It's weird. I think I want to try to stay off the subject because I don't really think, as a standalone, I think people are getting tired of the subject to some extent, and I don't want to turn into a news channel on the subject. A lot of people are doing it, and the news is out there. I don't want that to define what the channel is going forward. But I noticed, people are very much interested in that, and that's where the views might be. But anyway, all that to say, by the way, I got a copy of the class action lawsuit against the CCP, and I will be doing a vlog on it tomorrow, which it looks like an interesting lawsuit. It's a little long, it's a little dense, so I couldn't get through it today. But we'll see. Hey, DSLR Dave in the house. DSLR Dave is the thumbnail guy, and my friend, incidentally. I met him through YouTube. We became friends. He's from Montreal. How are the family doing? We're surviving. We are going for lots of walks. We went outside today, walked around the block, and then one kid says, I want to go home because this is boring. I was like, this is going to be the level of excitement for a little while. Oh, Ryan Britt says, been loving the videos recently, Viva. Thank you very much. We got Tim, who says, what was his favorite house he lived in when he was a kid? Oh, I know what he'll say to that. And we got, I hear a dog coming down the stairs. Come here, Barney. Greetings from the Czech Republic. How you guys doing there? Want to get up? 1, 2, 3. Huh, here he is, Barney. The Vlawg dog. How you doing? How you doing? Thanks. Oh, yes. Get my earlobe. Get my earlobe. Okay, so I think I've been waiting long enough. I see my dad. Oh, I think I see my dad watching us. And yeah, I can. Okay, okay, good. Down you go. Huh. Okay. Good evening. We got Chris in the house. We got Robert Quaha Pinheiro de Santos, Sul Português. How's it going? I just missed one here. I missed one. My Cypher says, my brown starfish wants to sue me for eating vegetarian pizza. Okay, and we got, hey Viva, greetings from the UK. I like your avatar, Borble. Oh, that's a beautiful, looks like a mastiff or maybe a bull mastiff. Okay, I'm going to bring my dad in. His name is Mortimer because my grandmother thought it was a good idea to name him Mortimer, but I know he'll have something to say on that. And what else? I'm the youngest of the 5 kids. The other 4 kids no longer live in Montreal, but that's it. Not my real name. He read it. All right. We got. So we got Francis Lalouche says we do have TP and everything is calm and civil. Things are going to stay calm and civil, and by and large, it's the densely populated big cities where the demand might be greater and stresses might be higher. But stay safe and keep your TP. Okay, bringing in my dad now. Do we do it? 40 more seconds. 40 more seconds. We're doing. And by the way, Frantisek, thank you very much. We got the Blockster says, hey, Viva, from the coast of Georgia. Much like Georgia the state or Georgia the country? And then we got Inspired John. John, nice to meet you. John, I met in person in Montreal this summer. Greetings from Pennsylvania. Love this. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. And it's going to be a little lighthearted. And it's good. It's my. I think it's my dad's first live stream. He's been a lawyer for 40 some odd years. He's pleaded in front of all the courts. He's used to the public scene. This, I think, is his first live stream. Okay, At the 5-minute mark, we're bringing him in. Dad, how you doing?
I'm here. I'm here. I don't know who else is here, but I'm here.
Thus far, there's 152 people watching. Some of the news I recognize, some are new. We got it's an amazing thing. So right now we are streaming live to the internet. It's not a subject that is related to the trending news, so it may not be in high demand, but it's going to be an interesting thing for anybody who wants to learn about the law, the practice of law.
You dragged me into this. I have no clue what we're doing here.
I texted for everybody out there. I texted my dad last night and said, "How would you feel about doing a live stream?" And I'm not sure, 100% sure he knew exactly what it was, but now he will be forever part of the Viva Frei library.
I had a rough idea, but not exactly an idea.
So, Dad, okay, starting from the beginning.
When I was born, I have no memories of the day I was born, but I know my mother called me Mortimer. That's what you referred to earlier, and it's a tricky little name because nobody is named Mortimer anymore, and I have to keep spelling it or repeating it, and people don't recognize that name. It wasn't the good name. Why she named me Mortimer, I only know. I think it was after some guy in England.
There was
English.
My dad's joke growing up was that it means the Dead Sea, Mortimer.
That's what it does mean. It means quiet waters. Mort is dead, and mer is sea, and the Dead Sea, it really means quiet waters. So
awesome. Okay, now, Dad, you are the youngest of two kids.
Yeah, I was the youngest of two kids. I had a sister, 5 years older, who paid no attention to me. So I almost grew up like a single child.
And I know this. I know the history and I know the story. But Grandma, growing up, what did she do?
I have no idea. What do you mean? What did she do?
Like when you were growing up, Grandma was doing what? And
she worked for a living. She was a liberated woman. She was like, who's the rivet woman there during World War II that they call the rivet?
The We Can Do It?
Yeah, the big famous poster of this woman with her muscles showing saying, "We can do it." Anyway, my mother was one like that. She worked all the time, from 6 a.m. till 8 p.m.
And okay, so I know your history. I think people want some law stuff. So when did you decide? And this is actually something I'm not even sure that I know. But when did you decide you were going to go into law or had an interest in law?
Well, when we grew up, you had to choose something real fast to get into. And so the idea was that if you went into law, good times, bad times, there's always a demand for lawyers. So that was my deal. Not because I knew much about it. And then I figured as I got closer to it, I figured I'd like it because it was an intelligent field where you actually argued about stuff that made a difference to people.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah. Real Bambunga is in the house. He says, starting from the beginning, okay. In the beginning, there was nothing. Then there was earth, was without form. And then my dad became a lawyer. So, okay, I know this, but you're born in Montreal?
Yeah, born in Montreal, 1942, practiced law for 50 years. Still do.
What was Montreal like in 50 years ago, 60 years ago compared to today?
Slower. Everything moved slower. Yeah, you traveled in little electric tramways. Everything moved slower. No Uber. Nobody ever took taxis. It was like a small, quiet town village. Still, it's French and has all the French culture. It was a lot. It's a unique city and a great place to grow up. And no crime. You live pretty close to the center of town. You're able to, in a short order, get to the heart of the city, unlike Los Angeles, let's say. So it's a good little city. So I grew up, took buses everywhere, totally safe. And then
so 90 Knot says, where did you go to law school?
I went to the University of Montreal. I did it in French. When I started, I didn't really understand French at all because you grew up in Montreal in different communities, and the communities were very isolated. Like if you were English speaking, you never mingled with French speaking people. The communities were quite diverse, separated. So when I grew up, the first time I started speaking French was probably close to 20 years old, 21. And that was when I went into law school. And so you go into law school, and I didn't understand a word of it. I was just writing fast, trying to copy the words down, the way you hear it. And then you go home and try and figure out what was said. So I went 4 years into the University of Montreal. By the time I came out, you were pretty bilingual. And so I'm pretty fluent speaking both French and English. But that's where I went, University of Montreal. Prior to that, I was at McGill.
Okay, and now I'm going to say hi to Lynn Washington, just saying howdy to you and your dad. Some of these faces I see every stream, and I'll explain to your dad how the internet and the YouTube channel works afterwards.
It's pretty fantastic. Some people might actually, especially the ones who might be far away from Montreal, might be curious about stuff.
Well, so I know people are going to be interested in the language issues, and I know some people. So you all got the same eyebrows, chin, lips, and nose. Now wait for the hairline. But my dad kept his hair for a long time. It only recently started going further back. And my dad doesn't like facial hair, but that's I'm a rebel, so I gotta. This is how I showed off as being a rebel at the age of 40 or 35, growing a beard for the first time. Jason McDonald says no crime. Duplessis says hello from beyond the grave.
Well, that was less criminal than it was just narrowness. You grow up with different things. He was very much against, I forget, religiously, because it was a very Catholic province, much more so than now. Now it's quite a different. People rebelled against the church probably in the 60s, and from the 60s onwards, it became much less Catholic. But Duplessis was a devout Catholic and didn't like the religious groups that knocked on doors, the Jehovah's Witnesses. And so he tried to lock them up and keep them away, and didn't. It was an interesting fight. Went to the Supreme Court of Canada, and it was called padlock law. And the Supreme Court said it was illegal, and he had to get rid of the padlock law.
What was this is actually sort of new to me. What was the padlock law?
He locked up places. He put a padlock on institutions or places where the Jehovah's Witnesses tried to practice.
Okay. We got Midroth, Esiki, I think is South Korean, which is there are people from Italy, Czech Republic, South Korea, Australia. It's amazing. Maybe not Australia.
I give my sympathies to the people from Italy.
Yeah, it's
guys in South Korea know how to do things. They are doing pretty well compared to the rest of the world.
And Bambuga says, so if English speakers never mingle with French speakers, if you slip up and say something French, can you ask people to pardon your French? Bambuga puns up the wall.
Yeah. Generally speaking, the French Canadians have a unique lifestyle and attitude, which in Canada is pretty unique. They love life, restaurants galore, amazing restaurants. You could travel 100 miles out of Montreal and luck on all kinds of really good restaurants. Most provinces in Canada, if you're 100 miles out of the city, the best you can do is a McDonald's. They're just like fast food places. But in Quebec, every village has unique little restaurants.
Okay, and so and I know the answer, but how did you do in law school? How did you do in high school? And then how did you get into?
That was totally never lived up to the potential. I did terribly in public school. I didn't do very well in high school, but I was lucky because unlike today, your record doesn't mean much. You just had to pass certain exams and do reasonably well at the last exam. So after like 11 years in public school, finally, the last series of months, I worked hard and got decent marks on the final exam. So nothing counted before. So I was able to get into McGill, which is a province like university with a really good reputation. And the admission was pretty easy. in terms of, you had to have the decent marks on those, what they call matric exams, and that was the one that I studied for. And the cost was something like $250 or $500 a year. That was it. So everybody could afford to go to McGill and the French equivalents, University of Montreal. University did not cost a lot of money. Colleges did not cost a lot of money. And so after 4 years of Bachelor of Arts, you specialize in different courses. And then you get, the practice was to go to a profession after that. So we would go to law school, accounting, medicine, depending on your interest and your ability. Medicine was always a difficult place to get into. Law was pretty easy. You didn't have to do really well to get into law, so it was one of those easier places to get into. I don't know if it's
Please, a question off subject, but Mr. Viva's dad, not to hear his name, said, "When did you notice Viva becoming neurotic?" I'm curious about this answer.
It wasn't immediate. It was an evolution. I noticed it when he started practicing law. Prior to that, I don't think he was subjected to that much stress and strain. But I think law, you have to have a particular a character, personality. And on the one hand, you have to, if you lose, and it hurts, but in the end of the day, new cases come up and new issues come up. So you have to have a little bit of a hardened approach. And I think David took all those losses to heart, if they were when he had them. And that, in the end, it made him very concerned about the practice of law, because the effect is quite traumatic for most people when they have to go to a lawyer. And depending on the case, depending on the problem, if it's a stressful profession. You end up, if you're doing litigation, you end up arguing in front of a judge. He's giving you a hard time. Your opponent is giving you a hard time. Your client is giving you a hard time if it's not going well. And so then you run back home and you don't sleep. And so all of this, I think, when did he become neurotic? I would say started. That was when I noticed it. Prior to that, I had little stresses and strains, but I didn't see it.
Well, it might have. It's pretty astute. It might have. The elements might have always been there, but it did. It probably picked up in law school. But yeah, when you become the lawyer, and we're going to get into this because I have questions for you about it. The stresses and the timelines and delays and not forgetting things. And my YouTube says, "Pop Fry, please assure David of your love. He needs it." So my joke was I was going to ask you which kid you love the most, but now that I have 3 kids, I know the answer to the question. When it comes to dogs, it's a little different, but kids.
Dogs are the same. You can't like one more than the other. It's all this, everybody says it. It's a truism, but it's true. You generally love all your kids the same. You may be aggravated at them all at different times or different ways, but nonetheless, it's I certainly can say that with total confidence that you love all the kids the same.
I could probably say with great confidence I might have given my father the hardest time, but I wasn't conscious of my other brothers growing up. But my dad doesn't need to confirm that. Jason McConnell has another question. It's a historical one, and it's an interesting one, actually. You remember the FLQ crisis, Dad?
Yeah.
So, I mean, for those who are not from Quebec who might not know what it is, tell them what happened. What happened under the War Measures Act?
Well, it was a unique time, and it was, if you go back into the 70s, as I said to you before, in the 60s, Quebec liberated itself, or abandoned, however you choose to look at it, from the highly controlled religious background. And you started having political movements where the pride in the French culture and language was like high up there. And the nationalist feeling took over. And beginning in the 60s, 70s, Quebec has an identity. And what's unique about it is that you're looking at 6-7 million people with a unique culture and language trying to survive in a sea of hundreds of millions of English-speaking people. And so how do you do that? So they protect their language, they promote their culture. Some people get annoyed at it, but in the end, it's worthwhile because it's a unique place. So in the 70s, they said one of the best ways that they thought, this political group thought, to protect it was to separate from the rest of Canada. And so you'd have all of Canada with one province, which is huge territorially, but very small in number. Just to get an idea of the size of the province of Quebec, it can contain pretty much all of Europe, almost every country, including England, France, Germany. The territory is so big that it could include all of these countries. But the population lives right near the bottom on the edge where it's warmer. But it's a huge province. Anyway, they wanted to separate from the rest of Canada, which would have made a big hole in Canada because it has like a bunch of provinces, and this one would right in the middle would be break up the country. So needless to say, like in Spain today, you have the Catalans, they want to separate from Spain, and the majority, of course, can react quite like majorities can. So they can dictate a lot and say to the small, the smaller group, no, you can't separate, forget it, that's out of the question. And during this time, there was a Revolutionary Party, which decided it was going to plant a few bombs here and there and, begin a mini kind of terrorist type of approach to try to create severe problems for Canada as a whole. So the federal government, which was then Trudeau's father, that was in power at the time, he brought into law what was
I think it's the Emergencies Act or the War Measures.
He brought into basically Emergency Powers Act, where basically it was like a dictatorship in a way. You could raid houses. Because what happened during that precipitated that was the terrorist group, who was French nationalist group, kidnapped somebody, a minister in Quebec, and that guy died, killed, and so the fear was that this was going to continue and get worse. So the government came in and basically, under the Emergency Powers Act, it was very dictatorial, and basically put people in jail and crushed the revolutionary movement, the terrorist one. But in the meantime, of course, the nationalist groups continued with the desire to have a cultural protection, language, etc. And so scared a lot of people, and a lot of people left the province of Quebec and moved to Ontario. And that is how Toronto became bigger than Montreal. Prior to that, Montreal was far more active and far bigger. Maybe not far bigger, but fairly big. And we had a lot of entrepreneurial people in business who just moved. And Ontario got rich and promoted the fears, so to encourage more Quebecers to leave, and so Quebecers left. And that's but the revolution that was taking place in 1976, 77, 78, it was it was quite minor except to those who suffered, and those who suffered were the minister, his family. One or two people died.
Okay, hold on before we get one more question on that. But Viva Frei, being half French Canadian, I can appreciate listening to your dad's stories. One question, Dad, are you subscribed to Viva Frei? I can answer because I actually subscribed to me on his computer just to make sure, because he wasn't getting notifications apparently.
No, I only subscribed very recently. I think I don't remember. But it was.
Do you remember what it was like when they enacted, when you walked on the street? Was it anything like what we're seeing today in terms of absence? Would you have noticed that you were under the Emergencies Act or the War Measures Act?
It was not as bad as no. In fact, today there was much less traffic. No, it wasn't anywhere close to that. I mean, people were afraid that, because it's a very peaceful country, so nobody ever faced a bomb or an explosion, So there were only like minor. It was minor compared to it, but the risk was that if you didn't stop the kidnapping, if you didn't stop the violence, that it could expand. So most countries, to protect themselves, do the same thing, and the majority, the power in place, did that, and or did control the terrorist movement, but the nationalist movement took off, and we had a referendum years later on whether Quebec should separate from the rest of Canada, similar to what's happening in Spain, and it was a very close vote. In,
Two of them.
and the test would always be, what would happen if the population voted in a province to separate? What would happen? How would the country react? Would they respect we know in Spain they didn't. People want to separate, but they imprisoned the leaders of those parties. We didn't do that.
And Jason, you've been told trying to protect your culture is racist. Forget that. Keep up the good fight. It's definitely worth fight, Quebec or elsewhere. What's it? And so you did.
I don't think it's racist. I don't think it's racist. The desire to protect your language and your culture and your history, for fear of it, just disappearing, is everybody here feels that they come from a chain of being that they would like to preserve. They're not racist. I wouldn't call Quebec a racist.
No, Jason was it was a sort of a tongue in cheek that's what anyone across the world says. To try to protect your culture is racist, and keep fighting the fight. And so now the question then is also on this subject. Why did you not decide to leave at that time when a lot of other people, Anglos, were leaving?
Well, my parents grew up as immigrants working in a community here where they were well accepted by the French population. They made a living working with French population. What you could call racist remarks were generally out of ignorance, which is still the case. But generally speaking, it was a very receptive place for immigrants to grow up in, and my parents succeeded, and I didn't have any reason to want to leave. I had already begun practicing law in a place that was pretty dynamic and doing very well and expanding in the country and in fact across the world. And so we had it was just a great place to live. It didn't cross my mind to leave. In fact, that's when we bought our house that we live in today.
Okay, so that was the historical part. You studied law. When did you go to law school?
The year?
Yeah,
19. Oh boy, law school would be 1963 to 1967. I'm not sure if anybody here was even born that time.
I think there's a few more mature viewers here, but mid 60s you studied law. I mean, I guess the question someone on Twitter wanted to know, like, how has the practice of law evolved over time? But what was it like? You get out of law school, then do you have a course au stage? Like, do you have to apply for a job? What's the demand for lawyers?
We had in your fourth year, you started working as a student, and then at the end of your fourth year, you had to write exams, and in 3 days, you had to write a whole series of exams on a number of different basic texts. So the law system here in Quebec is different than the rest of Canada. We have a civil code, whereas in California and Louisiana, I think they had a civil code. But for the most part, in Canada, it's a common law system like England, where the law is not codified. So we had to memorize pretty much this entire code. And it was pretty traumatic. It was with 3 days of constant exams, morning and afternoon. In fact, I took mine in Quebec City, which was they modified which city you took the bar exams in. Montreal 1 year, Quebec City the next. So I had to go to Quebec City, which was great. I mean, they had little restaurants everywhere. It's a tourist place today, like you can't believe, but then it wasn't a tourist place. And I remember after the last exam, going to one of these little French restaurants having a lobster for the first time in my life, pretty much. And I think it was like $2 or something, and a lot of wine.
I just had something to ask you about that. It was so. Oh yeah, sorry. So okay. Well, first things up, Jason McConnell. Thank you very much. The Okay, so back in the day, it was called the Napoleonic Code, right? When you studied it before the reform. And
Yeah.
so, explain to people what the Napoleonic Code. I don't have one here. We don't just show them, but now we have it's like 3,000 articles in the Civil Code.
It's always the same. The name, keeps changing. The Civil Code of the Province of Quebec, and basically it's pretty consistent. It was based upon the Napoleonic Code, and basically every right, every rule is attempted to be encompassed in that little book, which is about 3,600 articles, and it tries to govern most everything. And what it doesn't govern, often you have specific laws that are enacted, but it governs everything from starting off with you as a person. We're born, the registrations, the tutors, and all kinds of instances that you have to encounter during a life, and they try to cover it in one book. And it's interesting, but you had to memorize the articles. I remember one of the articles was that one of the questions on the exam was that if they would take the wording of the article and just leave out part of it, and you had to fill it in. So I think one of them was if you leased a bunch of sheep from a neighboring farmer, and while you were looking after them under the lease, they all died of some disease. What did what did the article say you had to give back or do? And basically, I think you had to give back the skins.
So when the Napoleonic Code, the reform to the new Civil Code was 2004, I think, right?
Yeah, but there are substantial changes, but the general idea is the same. If you look at the Civil Code today, it's pretty much the same as the Napoleonic Code.
Okay, we got one. Jason L says one last on culture. Without a shared culture, you have nothing that binds you together. That only leads to a breakdown of society. CUSA. Okay, we may or may not agree with it, but I mean, well, it's a nuanced discussion. But thank you very much, Jason, as always for.
Yeah, well, just remember in the United States, I mean, you have so much more diverse a community. I mean, we have basically French English here. I mean, but in the United States, I mean, it's a country filled with people from all different parts of the world. Not so here. It's becoming more, but it was much more simple here than in the States. The States has a huge cultural problem.
Okay, so you get out of law school and you graduate, and how do you
join a law firm? And I was lucky. I had, I was just lucky. I had decent marks. I had good marks when I graduated the law school, but finding a good job was quite difficult. It wasn't. So the law firm, when I joined it, was was 16 lawyers, which was pretty big in Canada for a law firm even then, but 16 lawyers. That's how I started off, and I was very lucky to be able to be there, because those 16 guys, or the 15 who were in front of me, were really exceptional. And you learn a lot from the people who you work with, and you learn a lot from your clients, but you learn a lot from people as you work with them. And it's a constant learning process, but being associated with those 15 people really made me a lot better person all around. And I was lucky that with those 16 people, by the time we finished, or I finished my stay there, because we had compulsory retirement for partners, and you don't have the protections that you have as an employee. Age discrimination doesn't apply. So as a partner, being a partner, the rules of the partnership apply, and you have no argument. So I had to take retirement at a certain age. But before I retired, we went from, we were a law firm of close to, 500 people, huge, one of Canada's largest law firm.
My dad is probably too modest. Hold on, I'll just turn this lighting.
No, I'm not modest. I didn't know a lot of people.
The law firm, if anyone who doesn't know, was it's called Stikeman Elliott in Canada. It's one of they call them the is it the Triple Sisters or the
Seven Sisters?
The Seven Sisters. And so Stikeman Elliott it's one of the it is known for litigation. It's one of the it's
known for tax corporate litigation. But it was the unique thing among others is that it was the only one of these so-called Seven Sisters, the largest firms in Canada, the only one that came out of Montreal and was controlled for the most part from Montreal. And as Toronto grew in size and the firm grew in size, the control shifted, so it's more of a commonality in terms of how it's run. But still, it's unique. It was the only major firm that began in Quebec and grew from Quebec.
And so when you started, you were at one point was it the managing partner or the litigation? What was it? The litigation?
You broke it down. I was. It was at one point I was in charge of what you would call a commercial group, not the corporate group, but a commercial group, which included labor law, included bankruptcy, included a lot of those commercial areas of the practice. And as each section grew, then it was able to go off on its own with a different head. So, but for many, many years, it was all encompassed in one group. There would be, let's say, 40 lawyers in our group. Some did labor law, some did bankruptcy law, some did insurance, different kinds of practice. It was a fun, just an exciting time as you're growing and as you're becoming more and more sophisticated. And the work is there where you feel you're doing some stuff that advances people, whether it's in a business form or otherwise. It's exciting. And so that was really an amazing time. And we grew and were successful. And then I turned around and suddenly I was compulsory retired. I never thought it would come. When we put those policies in place, I said, it's for those old guys, 60, 70. Then it's time for them to go. Then I was like 30, 40. I didn't think that, one of those days it's just going to come and, I'm going to be there. But it's, so the last thing you can do is complain about that rule because you applied it to everybody. And you applied it because as lawyers get older and they want to hang on to their jobs, they try to hang on to their clients, even though their clients are changing. There are a lot of younger people there, and they don't want to deal with some of these guys that they never, way older than them that they don't know. And so if a firm wants to grow, they have to adjust. And so you have to get rid of the older guys and make room for the younger guys. And that's what we did.
Okay, now growing up, because I lived under, not in the shadow, but growing up as a kid, whenever I would tell someone, what my last name was, and they say, "Oh, is your father Mortimer?" And I was like, "Yeah, why?" And I never knew exactly why they were asking, because they were involved in a file with you, and you had something of a reputation. Am I wrong in thinking you had something of a reputation? I think someone referred to you as a bulldog, or it was a pit bull, and I'm not sure which growing up now.
I would say more pit bull than bulldog. Pit bulls were a lot more. When you're in the fight, when you're in the battle, wherever it is, not just, you're in it full, 200%. And, it wasn't a question. Sometimes among lawyers, people said, it wasn't really true, but they thought that lawyers, were all clubby amongst themselves. So how could they really be adversaries? And so that maybe they do things as friends where the clients might not have liked that, granting delays or whatever might, the friendship among lawyers somehow was thought that maybe that would not be good in terms of representing clients as adversaries. So I guess I was like an adversary. So you would find lawyers that never even dealt with you saying, "Oh yeah, that guy, whatever." But I didn't realize that it would have been so difficult for you to have to deal with the fact that I was a lawyer here.
Well, no, it wasn't difficult. This is like when I was in elementary and high school, where I would talk to people, and at the time I had no understanding. Now, in retrospect, I can sort of understand what must have been going on. Is that if they're adverse to someone and you're the lawyer cross-examining them, and they see Frei hates kid at school, they might have
trying to join a private club where 20% of the members are people that you had adversarial relationships with. So you have to make a decision. Do you want to, but other people were better at it than I was. I found it easier not to want to alter what I thought I had to do based upon what club I wanted to join.
Well, that's a number of people. Once when I was a kid, and then when I was in the practice, they always said tough but fair. Like they said, he was not a lawyer. You were not a lawyer that came with a warning, but they came. It was you didn't come with a warning clause, but you came with a warning. And they said he was always tough in battle, but always fair and never back.
Probably true. I don't think I never did anything that I would be embarrassed about. If ever, I never did anything wrong. I just did what lawyers are supposed to do, which is represent their client.
Okay, now Jason McConnell says, thoughts on René Lévesque? Feel free not to answer, Dad. I said this would be legal and not political.
What, René Lévesque? I admired him a great deal. I think that René Lévesque was a person who believed in what we talked about earlier. He believed in his culture. He believed in his language. He wanted to protect it. I mean, if you're French in the province of Quebec, like I said before, you're living in a sea of hundreds of millions of people who speak another language. It's quite remarkable that Quebec has succeeded in still being a French province. And it's a wonderful thing. If it was a French province that discriminated against English-speaking people, it would be a problem. But it's not that. And if you're perhaps English-speaking, you might resent the fact that maybe you have to accommodate more than you would like the French language. But the accommodation is to protect the ability of this very small group in Canada to preserve their language and their culture. I mean, and their culture goes back. We're not talking, about something that is accidental. The French culture in France is these are major civilizations. And it's quite unique. In fact, some of the French language that we use, some of the words are still from, they're used in the 1800s, but not any longer in France. So some of the words that we have for car or objects are still preserving old words that aren't used in France.
Well, and for anyone who doesn't know the difference between French France and Quebec French in terms of all the swear words, in France, all of the swear words have to do with sex and sort of prostitution type things. And in Quebec, all of the swear words have to do with religious symbols and religious iconography, religious concepts. So you have your I won't say them, but they're like all of the swear words in French Canada or French Quebec relate to the church. And in French France, it all relates to sex and.
Well, what's also interesting, and it's when you're from France, you generally tend to think that you're the epicenter of French culture, which to some degree is true. And in Quebec, living far away, living in a sea of English-speaking people, you develop words and methods of speaking that are quite different than the way they are in France. And everybody tends to say, oh, the French, they sort of look down upon, the French in the way we speak French in Quebec, because they look at us like uncultured compared to them. But, the capacity to live in Quebec, preserve your language, and still, succeed in the face of competition from the United States and Ontario and the rest of Canada, develops very unique skills. And one interesting story was when one of my sons was working in France, because they were the company here called Alcan purchased the French aluminum giant in France. Well, lo and behold, you had a whole bunch of French Canadians going out to France and addressing the company, and rooms filled with engineers who were being lectured to by these Quebecers speaking the language that normally they would laugh at, except now their boss is the one that speaks that language in that way. So they underestimate. They just underestimate the depth of the potential of the people in this province.
Okay, now one thing that I know people or anyone who's going to be watching this later who's interested in law or thinking about it, you started practicing under the old code, under the old procedure where files could last as long as they ever needed to. Procedure was sort of tightened up in theory to put some delays on it. You started back when everything was paper and typewriters, and now it's all internet. How have you felt about the transition of law from what it was when you started to what it is today?
It's actually become, from my perspective, it has not increased in the speed. I don't know what the statistics are, in fact, but it takes just as long and longer for cases to get heard now as then. The speed at which you could do things, you have computers and you could work in groups and people would work on a given text and make changes. But if we had to get an injunction, for example, which is something, irreparable injury is going to take place unless you can get this injunction issued. Well, we would get the injunction issued at least as fast as is done today. We used to have what was called cut and paste. You used to take a document, make a change, cut it, paste it back together in a different format, do a photocopy of it, and out it came. And it was really fast. Having said that, I mean, I was head of the technology committee in my first computer was in 1970 in the 70s with Apple, and kept expanding all around. Technology is amazing and doing all kinds of things like we're doing now. But the speed at which you do things in law is no simpler now than it was then. Technology has not made it simpler, it just hasn't. And it's complicated, delays, the procedures have not expedited things. It's as cumbersome as ever.
It's funny, I never, until this moment, appreciated what cut and paste was. I always thought it was purely from a computer, and now I'm thinking there's an actual literal cut and paste.
No, you actually you changed something, but you just took one text, cut somewhere, pasted it on. It took seconds.
Dad, do you know Rue? If before I disclose who Rue is, Rue, can I disclose who you are to my dad? Let me just wait for Rue to say yes. You will be very. This is amazing that she's actually watching. Okay, when Rue gives me the authorization to tell to my dad who she is, Dad, you're gonna let me see. Yes, okay, Dad, it's Julia. Julia is Rue Macropod. So Julia, Rue Macropod, who you see here, used to work at our firm in Montreal before she's now in Europe. But and that's as much information as I'll disclose. But Dad, I mean, this is technology. Dad, Rue is so actually, because now we're skipping ahead. So you were at Stikeman Elliott for 40+ years.
Yeah, since 1967 to till 2000. So I know 45 years probably.
And so then when you were forced out of the partnership, that at that time
it wasn't forced out. It was like the clock was ticking. The calendar came up. That day came. Just off you went.
Okay, and now at that time I was at Board and Ladner, and I had left my firm. I started on my own, and then you still wanted to maintain a full active practice, not whatever was the alternative. And so we then started working together at Frei Legal. Rue came in, and we got some others. Now, what was it like? Okay, so you went from a big, I mean, the biggest, most prestigious law firm, where you were the head of the commercial litigation department, where you had this history. The history progresses the way it progresses, and then you go to a boutique with me, two other lawyers. I mean, did you notice any difference in the practice from a big firm to a boutique small firm?
The difference was in the support. In other words, you could practice law in a big place and never have to do anything dealing with administrative stuff, even though I was on management committees and things like that. But you have support, whether it was for research, whether it was for getting things done. You had a huge support system, which made a big difference in the actual practice. But from my perspective, I was practicing law in a big place. I was practicing law with you, and for me, it was I had no regret. Is not even no regret at all. I enjoyed the practice either way. I was practicing law. I was dealing with clients' problems. I was helping them resolve those problems. Try to do a good job at that, and that was what I continue doing. So
I remember.
the only thing I found of interest, looking back, is that even though we were working together, I don't think there was any intercourse in terms of the files that we had. You didn't work on the files that I was working on, and you never got me involved in the files that you were working on.
No, my files generally, well, they're not that they.
It was interesting because I would have more. I had more interaction within the previous firm but with Julie and the others that were working with us, I interacted a lot with them, but not with you.
No, I had my own niche of clients, which were
or what was referred to by one of those early proponents, your own reasons for keeping it separate. But I never understood that.
So now someone just says he meant intercourse in the legal and not biblical sense.
Yeah.
So here's something else that lawyers are going to ask, and I've often asked it to you: is how do you disassociate the emotional psyche part of you as a human, because you do things that would make other people feel bad, and in theory might make you feel bad for doing them, even though you have to do them as part of the job, and that's what lawyers do. How do you dissociate that part without people thinking you don't actually have that human part to you?
Well, it's because of the way the legal system exists. The system that we have is called an adversarial system. It just is. The role of a lawyer is to represent his client, whether a judge likes it, whether another person likes it or not. Whether it involves representing that person, period. And so your entire loyalty is to that client. And obviously, it's within the constructs of a legal system. You're not supposed to cheat, do things wrong to protect them, but that requires that you do your job that way in an adversarial system. And the lawyer on the other side is supposed to protect his client the same way. So in the end, through that adversarial system, hopefully the fair and true result occurs. But each person has a role. And so that's why lawyers have the reputation of everybody hates them, because somehow or other they think the other lawyers screwed them in some way, which isn't the case. I mean, sometimes the facts are out, and maybe they come out right, maybe they come out wrong, but it's your job to get those facts out for your client.
That's Pops.
Hi, Pops.
Who's that?
That's Mila.
Oh, hi. I don't see anybody. I don't see anybody. I just see myself in this little box.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, no, she's well, because you might not be watching it live, but okay. What are you doing?
I need a book.
Okay, go get one. So what? Another question, actually, before 90 Knots asks, I've worked with big law firms and small law firms. You've had the experience now in both, Dad. Is there a preference or not comparable?
Well, the real problem is that law has become unaffordable. It's more unaffordable in big firms, but it's unaffordable in small firms too. Small firms don't always save you money, even though the hourly rates are less. They put in more hours. Somehow it tends to become bloated, and so most people, if they're dealing with dispute resolution, going to lawyers is such a bad way to do it, because it just, unless you have a lot of money, you're going to pay a lot of money. And so there isn't a real solution to it. I don't know the answer is, but certainly going to a big law firm, when there is a particular expertise required, they will have it. In a smaller firm, you don't generally have the same choice of expertise, but you may not need it. For most law issues, corporate or litigious or particular fields, even small firms have more than enough expertise to deal with it. But some problems, whether you require more expertise. Like in a corporate matter, you could need labor law lawyers. You may need tax lawyers. You may need corporate lawyers to who structure things, and that could vary depending on the firm. Some firms have it, and other firms don't have it, and they're reluctant to get outside people in as well. So, yeah, that the care is in choosing law firms is one, the cost, and two, to make sure that wherever you choose to go, that they have adequate expertise to represent them.
And so someone asked, Joseph Morneau says, what's your opinion of private arbitration?
It doesn't save anything in terms of money. You pay the lawyers to do the work, and it's just as costly. You also pay the arbitrator, whereas when you go to the judicial system, you don't have to pay a judge. And we're talking big money for paying arbitrators. You're paying a lot of money for the same thing that you get for free when you go in front of a judge. It used to be that they'd say, oh, well, you could get a faster result if you do arbitration. But even that's not true. It takes a long time and a lot of money to do arbitration, generally. In some cases, it's worth going to arbitration when, for example, if you have two high-tech companies arguing over a patent or arguing over something that involves licensing fees or technical issues that a judge normally doesn't have. Judges come from the general practice of law, and they're not specialized. Whereas arbitrators, it's depending how sophisticated the system is, you could get an arbitrator very experienced in high tech, and so he will understand a high tech conflict a lot better. But that's a very specialized type of need. For most matters, I have not found arbitration to be cheaper or faster.
Yeah, we had one.
The other thing about it is that it's confidential. So in some cases, you need confidentiality. You don't want people to know that you're having this kind of fight. So if you go to a court system, it's not confidential. Everything's public. But if you can get agreement to go to arbitration, everything in arbitration is totally confidential. So you never.
Well, it's confidential. Confidential until you want to homologate the arbitration award, and in which case it becomes public at that point. And then if you don't homologate it, it's not enforceable through contempt.
It's relatively rare that the arbitration award doesn't get followed. And even then, you could, if it's highly secret stuff, you could keep it under seal. So there are ways to work around that. But generally speaking, I mean, I'd say from my experience, I never had an arbitration case where it did not result in a resolution. In other words, people respected the judgment. You went to appeal if you could. You tried to argue that he made a decision that went outside his jurisdiction. You'd find legal arguments to put it in doubt, to question it, attack it. But fundamentally, the decisions generally are respected.
All right, and Yankee Altman says Trump is live. Dad, do you want to watch Trump, or you got a few more minutes?
Sure, I got a few minutes.
Okay. Someone here said, I'm curious about this because I've had my own experience. How many attorneys were alcoholics? I was a court clerk, and alcoholism seemed to be a thing.
Well, I think in most of the medicine is the same. Medicine is drugs, lawyers, alcohol. It's good to alcohol is like it's a lubricant. So it's quite easy to move from a social lubricant to something that relieves stress. And there used to be lawyers, bankers, used to they kept looking at their watch as 11 o'clock got around because they wanted to get out and have lunch and drink. And in the olden days, of course, you used to have martini lunches, double martini lunches. Nowadays, you don't find that.
Auntie Shirley, Dad.
I think that there is probably a higher rate of alcoholism, but I'm not sure about that.
By the way, your sister, Dad, Auntie Shirley, just texted me and said, "Say hi, say hi." She's trying to watch on YouTube, but she can't seem to do it. We'll get her on. No, I brought up someone. Soria asked about my Twitter question, and I took a picture of it so I wouldn't forget. Okay, can you ask your dad what the biggest or most significant was?
Yeah.
What the biggest change was in his eyes, for good or for bad, and if he can approve, and if he approves.
Say that again.
What was the biggest change in law in your eyes, for good or for bad?
Interesting question. I would say technology, and I think it's made it worse.
So that's something that I think people don't. I mean, I've had my experience. I've only known about it in the era where you get an email and someone expects an answer within 3 hours. You grew up. You
go from that. I mean, that part of technology has not increased efficiency. It just has created more and more urgencies and more stress. I mean, for lawyers today, I mean, I still get phone calls Saturday, Sunday, all hours of the day, and people now assume they have a right. They
hold on a second, Dad. You're breaking.
People that,
one sec. We're not hearing anything now. Okay, no wait, Dad. Hold on 1 second. I'm gonna. 1 second. No, we're not hearing any of this. I don't think the connection is very bad. Dad, click. I'm gonna take you off. Click back. Hold on. Sorry, guys. I'm going to text my father and tell him to log back in. Let me know if you guys can see me back. Internet for everyone seems wonky lately, and my father seems to be disconnected. Oh, no, he's there. Okay, Dad.
Yeah.
Well, the connection is better now. By the way,
to speed it, the thing about accessibility with an iPhone has become enslaving for pretty much everybody. You now are reached at all times of day. So that has increased a lot of the pressure and has disrupted a more relaxed way to practice law. The other forms of technology have complicated things. For example, somebody could serve a proceeding or send you a document by email or by fax at any time of the day or night, and you're supposed to have taken knowledge of it, and you get blamed one way or another if you haven't, or if something else was prioritized. It's general. I don't see the benefits.
No, that's interesting. The one thing I've noticed, and I never knew it the other way, but do you find now that more people come to you with already more knowledge on the subject than people did back in the day before the internet, like in terms of getting their legal information already before coming to the lawyer?
Not really. Some clients, yes, but generally speaking, the clients that I've dealt with were all, oddly enough, quite intelligent, quite experienced, knowledgeable, not necessarily about the area of law, but knowledgeable about their business, whatever was their business. So on the one hand, no, I don't find that people question me more, not like Google in medicine, I don't think, not like a doctor. The law, I don't think, is as easy to summarize in a Google search.
Jimmy T, I've washed my hands. My hands are perpetually clean, so I have less fear touching my face. But when I go outside, it's immediate fear.
Yeah, I touch my face all the time.
Well, yeah, as my mother makes him wash his hands I thought, Dad, I thought you were going to say that it was Mom that made me neurotic, but it might have
No, you did it on your own. No.
Says, Mr. Frei, did you ever have to enforce the law on your son, like spanking or locked into his room?
Not locked. First of all, spanking when we grew up as parents and as children, before we became parents, was not looked at as badly as it's seen today. I always felt that if you said something bad to your kid, insulting, it would remain in his head forever. But if you smacked him on the rear end, it goes away like in 30 seconds. So obviously we're not talking about violence, but we're talking about some form of discipline that you could apply, and then it's gone. But so did I guess where was my, did I spank kids? Yeah. Did I raise my voice? Yeah. Did I ever insult a kid? No. Did I ever call him stupid? No. Sometimes I said what you did was stupid, but I don't think I've ever called any of my kids any kind of name that would stick in their heads as, something that would a live show with all those other kids and see what they have to say.
All right, Dad, and also try not to hit your mic. I think you're touching the mic and then things go wonky. And it's in fairness to my dad, I was also not the easiest kid to deal with for a little while. But Jason McConnell, Dad, favorite restaurant in Montreal? And I'll say mine afterwards.
Usually the steakhouses. Some steakhouses. I'd like the traditional one, the old one that's been around, Moish's. I like the Snowden Delicatessen for smoked meat, which is the best smoked meat still, not better than Schwartz's. I like Rib and Reef. I like Baton Rouge. Everyone for a different reason. I like the one, the Italian restaurants. There are so many good restaurants around. So many choices, so little time, so little money.
Well, mine would undoubtedly be Moish's and Park Sushi. That would be the for sure. Now, Rue Macropod, Dad, asks, Mortimer, do you think that to be a better lawyer, you should explore other, maybe even unrelated fields of knowledge? I know your answer, but
I think that you have to have and undergo different experiences. I'm not sure whether it requires an academic experience, a life experience for sure. I think what will make you a better lawyer and a better person is to be exposed to different life experiences. I don't necessarily mean like drugs or, as diverse sexual exploits as you might want to consider, but basically experiencing things, encountering other people who are different than you. That's really good for law. In terms of courses, I think the humanities, if you could have the opportunity to study some of those things, makes you a better lawyer. English, whatever language you're practicing in, history.
Okay, now, if I may, what was I imagine you have to have the most memorable case that you were ever involved in, or your most gratifying judgment.
Probably it would be one where a company, through no fault of its own, was essentially being put out of business by some greedy company who wanted to appropriate that client's business. And we had a weak case in law unless we could establish certain facts, but we couldn't establish the facts. So ultimately we were going to lose. However, before losing, we were able to continue in litigating while building an alternate business in the same field, of course, but setting up with new employees. And so by the time the case was over, we were back in business, and it was satisfying because that business has now become, extremely successful. And it was satisfying to be able to help somebody in that way, being treated so unfairly.
All right, and do you have a most devastating, soul-crushing loss that you've never gotten over? That
Yeah, There are a couple. There are a couple that always exist, where my clients were not exactly well behaved. Their company was going to go public, and they did some dealings that took advantage of insider trading. Uh, and in first instance, the judge said, "Okay, what they did was wrong, and I'm going to condemn them to pay a certain amount of money." And then the other guys went to appeal, and they said the judge said he did something wrong, and he did something wrong, and the amount of money that he got was nowhere near what he gained, and then they saddled him with a judgment that was horrific. However, I felt very badly for him.
Yankee Altman said something funny here. St. Viator or Fairmount Bagels? Do you find there's a difference between either?
Yeah, it's a slight difference, but for people who don't come from Montreal, you're talking about bagels that are unique in the world. They're not made anywhere the same anywhere. New York, they have loads of bagel places across North America, but Montreal bagels are unique. I like St. Viator bagels.
But
that place near where David lives makes its own style of bagels, which tastes pretty good too.
For anybody who doesn't know, that they're not like those fluffy Lender's bagels. Like they have a hole in the middle. They're like pretzel bagels almost. They have like sesame seeds or black seed. They're tighter. They're doughier. They're delicious.
It's not like bread. A lot of the bagels in North America are really a form of bread. They're fluffier. They're more bread-like. The Montreal bagels are more lead-like. You eat them, they're quite heavy. But they have a unique taste.
And Yankee also says, "Did your dad ever go to the Tam Tams back in the day?" I think I can answer that question.
Yeah. I went to pick up David. I went around. I had no idea. The extent to which that was like a drug-related place. Oh my God.
And anyway, so someone can actually go to one of my videos. I did a video on the Tam Tams, but it was a modern one, so with family, and we were just looking at the slackliners and the drummers. But go to Viva Frei Tam Tams, you'll see what it's all about. Mr. Dad, after winning a case, what was your favorite celebratory scotch?
Well, first I would be martinis. Scotch. In those days, I wasn't into Scotch as much as now, but I guess I'd have to look at one of these bottles. Let me see here. Lagavulin was a good Scotch.
Lagavulin is dollar for dollar the best.
But we had a around the courthouse. There used to be a small little restaurant in the basement, and one day we once had a case, where we had an adversary and a so-called adversary who was more like we were on the same side against the major adversary. And we had a major victory. And what was that major victory? We got the judge to postpone the case for a little while. And practically speaking, delay produces results. And in this case, delay would help our client or our clients. So we get this delay, we fight about it for like a morning, and then we say, okay, well, let's go have a drink at our favorite place. There was a Petit Navire or the Little Ship or something like that. And we spent the entire afternoon drinking, I think. At which point, one of the students who was working on the case he just came out of school, and he's like what they call a clerk, like a stagiaire. He's not even a lawyer yet, just doing messages on a file, so to speak. So he turns around and he looks at us and he says, "Holy mackerel, if you do this just for postponement, what do you do when you win a case?" And so that was funny. Well, and then we had romances within the office today. Oh my God. The reason why I think of romance, because while we were at that drinking place, stagiaire that I was working with, a female, fell in love with the lawyer on the other side and established a relationship that I think has continued for 40 years. But nowadays, I mean, the mores that govern an office are so totally different than what they were when we were there.
And so everybody knows you've been married, Dad, to Mom for how long now? You had a big one this year, I think.
50 years.
50 years.
50.
50. 50. Half a century, people. That's nuts.
When we were doing it, I mean, when I was doing the group, I mean, we had in our group, I'd say 50% of the women and partners, they had good opportunities. It was not as good as, let's say, that the men had, because men had fewer responsibilities at the time. They didn't have to, so they didn't have to look after household, matters or children. It was the system favored men, and maybe still does, but the relationships were different. Now, everybody who thinks the old rules apply are for sure in trouble.
Okay, the Sassy says, Dad, you should have your own show, which I think we might have time to work on now. I'll talk you into starting a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
JPL says, I wasn't an easy child either. Drugs, driving, high school dropout, now I'm an engineer working bleeding edge of AR helmets for first responders. You're a successful lawyer. Us problem children work out the best. I think it has to do with defying authority. That's a liability.
Well, the thing that you have to worry about more than even we did, and we came from a pretty drug loosey-goosey relationship, in society. I'm not talking about myself, but generally speaking, like you had in the 60s, it was an introduction to all, whether marijuana or LSD or stuff like that. But it's today, the impression I have is that it's much worse, and that the greatest risk to you and or your children are drugs. And you never know, especially, kids in their late teens, you don't know what effect it's going to have on them when they hit the 20s and later in life. For me, drug dealers are, the problem. But it's a system. So if you said to me, the biggest risk for my kids, it would have been exposure to drugs.
Well, now the drug dealers are the Canadian government, at least when it comes to marijuana. So that's
source of revenue. Things change.
All right, Dad. What do you say? You want to go? You want to watch Trump and watch the news, or do you want to?
I gotta go watch Trump. I'm gonna go watch Trump and see what everybody starts screaming.
Now, before we go, I want one thing, because you tend to have words of advice that soothe the distraught or the fearful thoughts.
I don't.
How does all of this end up? How does all of this wind up in the next 3 months to 2 years?
It's going to be rebuilding of an economy. I mean, the disease threatens people like me. For all of you guys who are young, nobody's dying. Very few people are dying. The statistics are 80% of the deaths are people my age and older with pre-existing conditions. So, to destroy a whole economy, you look at in Canada, what we have, 30 people dying, dead as a result, 30 people, and yet you're shutting down an entire country. In the United States, I don't know what it is, it's changing, but 1,000 people have died, all of whom or most of whom are very old. Not that old people should die, but shutting down a whole country you're losing trillions. How does it end? It ends that we get over this. 80% of the people will ultimately have this coronavirus there, and they're all going to, 80% of the population will eventually have it. Some will never know that they had it. Many will have it and be okay. And we're going to have 6 months to a year to somehow work out the damage that has taken place economically.
Okay, so you don't fear the ultimate doom and gloom of totalitarian fascist government coming in and imposing martial law for the next 2 years?
No.
But people fighting over food, supply chain.
No, there's no shortage of food. It may be shortages in the grocery store overnight or tomorrow, but they replenish it. There's no shortage of food. The food is growing. I mean, California is like the breadbasket of the world. The Midwest, there's more cattle and farms than you can throw a stick at. I mean, no, we're not going to have any problems like that. It's just a question of reacting to the fear of getting infected. But you know,
I was saying, it's like, it's going to traumatize a generation of people. Like, people now, I went to get Barney's Prozac from the vet just so I could have an extra month. And like, we were like going in, the woman put it on a table and then left the room. So I took it off the table. The neighbors, everybody's crossing the streets. That's if you come in contact with people outside,
because the rules are, we're told that the current problem from my perspective is that unless they can lower the number of infections at any one moment, the hospitals are becoming overloaded. So people are fearful of getting sick, getting into a car accident, falling down, because when you go into the hospital, you're probably going to get sick, not cured. And they won't have beds, and they won't have ventilators, and they won't have drugs. And the people who are supposed to be helping you are going to be themselves carriers. So this is the current problem. But
one of our kids' dad wanted to go learn how to ride a bike, and I said we might have to wait just in case. I mean, unless, like, the joke is now, if you break your leg, you're gonna walk, but you're gonna have a limp for the next year.
If your kid gets this coronavirus, nothing's gonna happen to the kid. It's nothing. The kids get over it. Just look at the statistics on who has done it.
It's 87% over 70, and I think the vast majority have 1 to 3 underlying conditions. Not that it doesn't change the results. It's just those are the stats, from what I understand thus far.
So for those are the stats in Italy. Italy, that has the hugest number. I think they have more deaths than they had in China. They're almost all people over 75. There are no kids, nobody under 30. It's but the government is there's this book that actually I pulled it up to look at again. You know that book by Gustave Le Bon, the guy who wrote the book The Crowd. And The Crowd was used by the guys on Wall Street to try to understand how crowd behavior takes place. And some guys got very rich, speculating on stocks when publicity takes place and the crowd moves in a direction. So what you have now is crowd behavior. So the logic behind some of these decisions may or may not exist, but fear has taken over. So the crowd moves in direction of fear. So we have a gross overreaction as far as I'm concerned, and I'm, major exposed. So, but I think it's an overreaction. And so what's going to happen? Another couple of months will go by and it'll go away, and it'll just be economic after that. But people lost jobs. People, people are getting unemployed. It's tremendous strain on what it does to them. So
if there's one silver lining, Dad, I have not been sneaking into your house through the back door to steal meat from the freezer, because I don't want to get. I'll wait.
I noticed you have a supply.
All right, Dad. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Dad. Okay, I'm going to end the broadcast. Everybody, Dad, stick around and we'll just talk for 2 seconds, and I'll call you back. Everyone, thank you very much. And I hope I hope you got something out of this. It's a nice change of pace, and my dad gives good advice, I think. So I'll see you guys next video. I got something coming tomorrow for sure, or the day after, but talk to you soon. End broadcast.